Evicted forever, 2 hours to pack. This is how 75 years ago, the largest religious deportation began in the USSR. During the operation, called North, more than 10,000 Jehovah's Witnesses were forcibly taken from Moldova, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states to Siberia. Why was this particular religious community targeted by the repressions? Why was all information about this crime hidden for so long and so carefully? And how has this practice found new life in Putin's Russia? Let's figure it out. In Ukraine, this operation was carried out under the codename Troika. It was developed over the course of a year with great care and detail. Jehovah's Witnesses were disliked by the Soviet authorities for many reasons. They were completely apolitical. They didn't vote, didn't join the Komsomol or the Communist Party, didn't serve in the army, refused to work on collective farms, and wouldn't mention Stalin's name in their sermons. And they never sang the Soviet national anthem or stood up when it was played. All of this was regarded as anti-Soviet agitation, espionage, and subversive activity in the interest of the West. Here's what Viktor Abakumov, the Minister of State Security of the Soviet Union, wrote to Stalin in a top-secret memo at the time.
Members of the Jehovah's Witness underground conduct vicious anti-Soviet agitation, spread provocative fabrications about Soviet authority, and promote propaganda about establishing a system in the USSR where power should belong to the clergy. The Ministry of State Security of the USSR considers it necessary not only to arrest the leaders of the Jehovah's Witness sect, but also to deport identified Jehovah's Witnesses and their families from Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia to the Irkutsk and Tomsk regions. In total, 8,567 people are subject to deportation, of which 6,140 are from the Ukrainian SSR. Viktor Abakumov, Minister of State Security of the USSR, February 19, 1951.
Early in the morning on April 8, 1951, the order was given to begin the operation. 5 or 6 NKVD officers would burst into the homes of community members, read out the indictment and the order for property confiscation. However, before loading people into trucks, adults were offered a kind of letter of repentance to sign, renounce their faith, and confirm their loyalty to the Communist Party. Notably, not a single Jehovah's Witness signed that letter. And already the next day, thousands of people were herded into freight cars and sent to Siberia. Here's how the victims of these crimes describe what happened in those days. Many decades later, their testimonies were collected in a special memorial book.
At 3 in the morning, someone knocked on our door. Owner, open the door. Dad opened the door. They came in and said, "Are you going to keep believing in your God or will you renounce him? If you renounce him, sign here and we'll leave you alone. But if you don't, you'll be sent to Siberia, to the land of the polar bears." And Dad told him, "I will never renounce my creator." Then they told us to pack up and gave us just 2 hours for everything. I had just turned 13 at the time, and my mom was holding a tiny 3-month-old baby in her arms. Olga Seniva, deported to Siberia in 1951.
They put us on a regular freight train. There were a lot of people there. It was hard even to move around the train car or find a place to put our things. When we arrived, they herded us all into a bathhouse. There, for the first time in the 2-week journey, we were able to wash ourselves. They settled me and my parents in a former stable that had been divided up with partitions. It was full of bed bugs. At night, they bit us so badly that by morning, our whole bodies were covered in bite marks, and everyone was herded into the community center. The commandant forced us to sign a document stating that we had come to Siberia forever and had no right to return. Tadeusz Korczynski, deported to Siberia in 1951.
In Siberia, all these people continued to be watched, and reports were regularly sent to the state security agencies. In one such memo, the MGB commissioner in the Irkutsk region wrote that Ukrainians were, and I quote, "the most vicious and hateful group toward the Soviet regime among all the newcomers." Ukrainians were irritating not only because of their religious beliefs, but also because of their language, their unwillingness to compromise, and their remarkable courage. By relocating people from the western regions of Ukraine as part of Operation Troika, the Soviet authorities were pursuing several goals at once. First, to remove the most disloyal groups of the population. Second, to intimidate those who remained. Look, the same thing could happen to you at any moment. And third, the most backward and harsh regions of the Soviet Union received practically free labor.
They ended up in horrific living conditions. They were housed in barracks designed, for example, for 20 people, but 120 people were crammed in there. Everyone was required to work, and the work was extremely hard, like logging. It didn't matter if you were a woman or not, a nursing mother or not. Just today, we found out that on that train heading east, can you imagine? Children were being born to families of Jehovah's Witnesses.
In 1996, under Yeltsin's Russia, the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses was declared unfounded. And everyone who had been deported to the North back then was recognized as victims of political repression. But then history took an astonishing turn. In 2017, the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation declared Jehovah's Witnesses an extremist organization. Their activities were banned and their property was confiscated. The authorities accused the community of distributing dangerous literature, threatening national security, and disturbing public order. Under Putin, bans in criminal cases once again became tools for pressuring believers. And the continuity of policy toward dissenters became obvious to everyone.
Well, it's an organization, right? Just imagine, I don't know how many of them there were, 200,000 people or so? And the PR president signed a decree and wrote, there is no such organization. So, moreover, if you identify yourself with such an organization and show any kind of activity or engage in any kind of work, then you're subject to criminal prosecution. So, being a Jehovah's Witness in Russia today is a crime.
Along with Putin, the Russian Orthodox Church has become the main guardian of the fandom of the Soviet Union. This is exactly what the Kremlin needed: total submission to authority, the destruction of freedom of religion, especially in the occupied territories, plus total control and repression. With the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russian Orthodox Church supported Putin's actions, calling the war a great mission. Priests blessed the soldiers and sprinkled holy water on tanks, essentially giving their approval and justifying mass killings. While missiles were destroying Ukrainian cities, prayers for victory were being recited in Russian churches. And even when declaring an Easter truce, the Russian Federation itself broke it just a few hours later.
Yeah, you can swing the censor all you want, cross yourself right to left or left to right, dye eggs and bake your Easter cakes, but none of that brings you any closer to Jesus Christ because it's not just rituals that you perform mechanically. It's a state of the soul. But the soul there is one that wants to destroy everything in the name of some great Russian idea, which they call the Russian world.
These are shots from the city of Druzhkovka in the Donetsk region. On April 3rd, after a Russian strike, the St. Nicholas Church was damaged. Part of the roof was destroyed, windows were blown out, and the interior was mutilated. This is just one of the latest examples showing that the concepts of faith and holiness have long lost any meaning for the Russian occupiers. Since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, more than 700 religious buildings, churches, mosques, and synagogues have been damaged or completely destroyed. Most of them are in the Donetsk, Kharkiv, and Kherson regions. For the occupiers, it's not just about territory. Just like 75 years ago, history is repeating itself. And now, for Putin's henchmen, the most important thing is the destruction of memory, culture, and the very idea of freedom, including the freedom to believe.